Guys, welcome to another tutorial where I'll show you guys how to use Prisma together with MongoDB and how you'd create users inside your database using a simple form. Before I begin, I'd like to request those of you that are not subscribed to please subscribe and hit the like button, and also don't forget to turn on the push notifications that you might not miss a video from me. Now, before I start, let me show you what I have here. What I have on my left is a simple Next app. Now I'll start with my page. Now inside my page.tsx file, I have my home component. And inside this home component, let me just expand this. I have a link. This link is just directs you to a page, which I'll show you. And that's what you're seeing here on my right. Then inside here, I have my sign up route, which just contains a simple form. This form has two inputs, one for the name and the other for the password. It also has a submit button. Now inside this form I also have an action, and this action attribute calls this function known as handleRegister, which in turn calls this other function called createUser, which I've imported from app/actions/createUser. We can find it here. Now whatever this function does is a server action. Sorry for that. That's why I have it here in its own separate folder, which I've labeled as use server. Now we'll populate this one later, so don't worry about that. Now coming back to my browser, if at all I press on this register now, then I'm redirected to this form which I have here, which only has the name input and the password input and the submit button. Now I'd like to show you guys how to set up Prisma. So first of all, what you need to do, you'd need to install some packages, Prisma included. So what you do here, you'd need to install Prisma. You do npm I and then Prisma. You'll also need the Prisma client, so you do at Prisma/client. We'll also need something we call bcrypt. For those of you who've worked in backend, this one is used for hashing password. So we'd need bcrypt. We'd also need bcrypt types. But then that will install later because it will be a dev dependency. Just because of TypeScript. I won't do that right now because I already have the packages installed here, as you can see. Now once you've installed that, you need to run a command which is npx prisma init. Now what this one does, I'll show you what it does. It creates for us two files. One file is a folder known as Prisma, and the other is a .env file. Now if you look inside the schema, inside the Prisma folder we have the schema.prisma file, and this is where we'll define our models for our database, our providers, then our URL. This is what we'll use to connect to our database. Now if I look inside the .env file, what I find here is our database URL, and right now it's initialized to the PostgreSQL, which we'll not use in this project. We'll use MongoDB, and I'll show you how. So first of all, what you need to do is to come inside the Prisma folder, then go to the schema.prisma file, then inside here change the provider to MongoDB, because that's what we'll use today. And once you're done with that, we need to get the connection string from our MongoDB server. So what I'll do is just go to Chrome, then my database, then inside here, let me expand this, and go to connect, Then scroll down to where I have MongoDB for VS Code, and then just copy this string right here. Now I have two users in my database. Let me show you. One is known as the admin and the other is Judge Nathan. I think I'll use Judge Nathan for this project or this tutorial. I'll come back here, then paste in whatever I copied. Then make sure this is a string. Then inside here, I'll just replace this with the username, which is George Nathan 010. Then my password is Nate12. Now once that's done, I'll come back to my schema.prisma file, and then inside here I'll define my user model. Now this user model will be my collection inside my MongoDB. I'll show you how that works out. So I'll do model, then user. Then the user must have an ID, which will have a decorator of ID, and then it will be generated by default by our database. And then we need to map this to how the ID attribute looks like or is structured in MongoDB. And if you've worked with MongoDB, it's always slash or underscore ID. So here we do a map and then underscore ID. Then we'd give it a type of DB object ID. Yeah, I forgot to put the type. The type of our ID will be string. And then to keep this simple, our user will only have a name, which is an optional string, and then a hashed password. It will also be a string, an optional string for that matter. Now this is our user model. Now this user model will map to our collection inside our MongoDB. And I'll show you how that looks like. If everything works, we'll just do npx prisma db push. Now this is the equivalent of a migration. Now we'd wait for that to run. It seems like we have an error. Let me have a look at it. Oh yeah, let me go back to my .env, and here I need to give my database a name. Let me just call it auth. Then let's try running that again. Let's see whether that works. Again, whatever this one does is it's the equivalent of a migration in a SQL database, and it only loads or syncs our database with whatever models that we have. As you can see, this one works, and whatever this auth does is it's just the name of our database. Let me show you how that looks like. Now, if that was successful, if I go back to my MongoDB and then just refresh this, let me first of all go to my databases. And then go to browse collections. Now inside here you see I have a users collection. But right now we have no documents or no users because we haven't created any user yet. But as you can see, it worked. So that name, this is the name of our database, and then our user models or collections will be placed inside these collections. I go back to VS Code. Let me close down everything and then close all the editors too. Like just do this. Now next, what I need to do is to define my Prisma client. And once we run that npx db push, Prisma db push, a client is generated for us. Now what we do, as per convention, we define this client as a global variable, so that now I'll show you why we need to do that in a moment, so that we can access it from elsewhere and just import it instead of having multiple instances of it. Because in Next.js we have hot reload. Now if at all we defined the client in every component that needed to use, let's say, a user from the database, then we'd have many connection streams to our database, and that would have performance issues. And that's why, due to convention or best practices, it's always good to define it in a folder elsewhere and just make it a global variable. Inside here I have a libs folder and then an empty Prisma dbts file. Now what I'll do here, I'll just import the client or the Prisma client. Let me see if that will be imported automatically. No, let's just do it manually. Prisma client from Prisma client. Now if you use TypeScript, this one might seem familiar. So we do declare global. This can also be found in the documentation, so if at all you don't understand, you just refer to the documentations. Then we'll have a variable, let's call it client, which will be of type Prisma client or undefined. What I'll do down here, I'll actually now define the variable. I'll go const client, and then first of all I'll assign it to the global variable. And if at all we don't have that defined, then we do a new Prisma client. So we create a Prisma object. And then something else we need to do, if at all we are not in production, meaning we are in development. Let me show you how we tackle that. We do an if statement. Is not equal to production, meaning we'll be in development. Then we do this assignment, we do global this, a client equals to client. Now what this one does is it ensures that if at all we're in testing or in development, then we have one instance of this global client here, which is just an object from this Prisma client class. Now finally what I'll do, I'll just export the client. Let me do default. Now this one makes it accessible throughout our application. Now, what we need to define next is our server action, and our server action would be actually creating a user and sending that user to our database. So I'll close this down. Next, what I'll do, inside my actions folder, come to my function here, create user. Now what this function does is it receives the form data which is passed to it from inside our sign up route. Let me show you. So inside here, once the user has typed in the name and the password, you'll press the submit button, and this will trigger this function here. This function here receives form data. If at all you've used this API, this might seem familiar. We don't need JavaScript for this. Now this form data will also be passed down to our create user function, which is what we want to populate right now. Don't worry about the toast, I'll show you how that falls into place. Now inside this create user, we receive the form data. Now in order for us to get the name and the password, we'd actually use the name attribute that are found within our form data or our form. We'd do constant name equals to form data dot get. Then we'd go with the name because that's what we named our name input. Then we'd do the same for the password. Or get. Then we'd go password. Now whatever this two does is it gets for us the values that are typed inside the input fields with the name attribute which points to name and password. Now before we pass this to our database, what we need to do is hash this password. And because we're using TypeScript, it doesn't have the bcrypt types by default. So what you need to do before we do that, you need to come back to your terminal. And then inside here you need to install the bcrypt types, but then you'd save them as a def dependencies by using the capital -D. So you do -D, and then here you just install types /bcrypt like so. And then once that's done, you should have that package as a dev dependency, and that will fix issues. But if you have JavaScript, then you don't need to do all this. This is just for TypeScript. And then here we need to import that bcrypt from bcrypt. Then we'll also need our client. We need app, and then leads, and then Prisma DB. So this one is what we'll use to interact with our database. Inside here, before I create a new user, I'll just hash this password. So what I'll do is, let's create a new variable called hashed password. Then we'd await bcrypt to hash the password for us. So we do hash, then we pass in the password. And then the salt rounds, let's just do 10. Now once we've hashed that, and we have an error here, but then I'll come back to that. Once we've hashed that password, we just create a new user. We do user. The user will tag in the name. Then also the hashed password. Now if you're using TypeScript, this should give you an error because the user type is not defined here. So what we'll do here, once we created our Prisma client, it also generated our user type. So what to do here, we'd import the user from Prisma client. That will be the type of our user here. I'd fix those errors in a while. So next what we need to do is actually now save our user to our database. So first of all, we'd have to use our client here. This is how we do it. Let's do response. We await client user create. Then here we'd go with data, which is an object, and then just spread in our user. Then this function would need to return the response. Now what this response is just our newly created user. So let me fix these errors that TypeScript is giving us. So first of all, I do, if at all this key exists in the form, I change this name into a string. So I do, or otherwise it will be null. Do the same for the password. This is called, we're narrowing down the type. Then I'll define another condition down here and say, right below this and say, if our name is equal to null, or our password is also equal to null, then I'll throw a new error. Just to invalid credentials. So that should fix the first error, and then the second one, let's take a look at it. Property ID is missing in type. Okay, so we don't actually need this. I think it will infer it for itself because the ID is dynamically generated inside the database. I think this should be functioning correctly. We also don't need this input up here. Now let's test our function. Now if I come back to Chrome, then inside my form, let's say we have a user called Nathan, and then just do a random password, and then press submit. Then what I'll do is just open my network tab and check whether our request was successful. Yeah, then we have success here. Let me just look at my console because I also logged out the user. So we have our user by the name Nathan, then we have the hashed password, and these are the details. So that works. Now when I did that, you saw a toast that said success. And this is how that works. So inside VS Code, I have this toast provider. And what this toast provider does is it takes in a string and just brings up a toast whether we have an error or whether we have, let's say, a success. Now how I did that inside here is if we had a user, which was just the response that we returned from this function, then if we have that user, then we just lead toast.success and then just pass the success message, and then toast.error, if at all we had an error, we'd see something went wrong. And that's how simple it is to just integrate Prisma with MongoDB. Now if at all I go back to the browser, yeah, and go back to my collections. Then inside here, if at all I refresh this, it's inside here I have a document of one user. The user is called Nathan. He has an ID which is dynamically generated, and this is where you can see that underscore ID which we mapped inside our Prisma. Then we have the name and the password. Now you'd had many fields inside here as you'd want, and because this was just a simple tutorial. But then if you guys also want to see how you can do authentication with something like NextAuth and then in tandem with Prisma and MongoDB, then let me know in the comments below. If at all you guys like the video, please like and share and subscribe. Then I also have a lot of material as regards to how to use Prisma in tandem with MongoDB and then TypeScript and NextJs. If at all you also want content on that, just let me know down in the comments below. Thank you for listening.